One of the things I tell people is, whether you're talking about it or not, the people around you are using it. So your clerks, right, who maybe are in law school already using it and a few years out of law school now are going to start being used to using it. They're going to use it whether you're telling them to or not. And so you might as well be open about it, have a conversation about it, which I do anytime I onboard someone new, whether it's a clerk or an intern.
Where does AI fit into trials of the future? Because we're already beginning to see it pop up in courtrooms of today. Welcome to Clarity on Tech, a podcast powered by the Thomson Reuters Institute. I'm Zach Warren, the Institute's Technology and Innovation Insights Lead. In each episode, we dive deep into the future of the legal, corporate, tax accounting and audit, and government communities. Today, we dive into how AI will impact the future of trial courts. Will AI change access to justice for trials? And is there a risk on over-reliance on the new technology? As part of our Courting Change series, here's TRI's Rabia Butler to introduce Judge Maritza Braswell and Judge Pamela Gates, who explore how judges are thinking about potential benefits and drawbacks of AI integration.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Rabia Butler, your host, and today we seek to provide some clarity on how powerful technologies, especially artificial intelligence, reshape the trial court experience. Artificial intelligence is a force that is undeniably reshaping our world, and its impact on the trial court is subject that demands our attention. Judges draw on their extensive experience to provide valuable insights and grapple with the challenges of balancing potential benefits of AI with the need to respect principles of fairness, transparency, and human dignity. Today, Judge Maritza Braswell and Judge Pamela Gates will pull back the curtain a bit on these pressing issues. In this candid judge-to-judge dialogue, they'll share insights from their extensive experience on the bench and explore everything from AI's current applications in the courtroom to its potential future impact on judicial decision-making. Thanks for joining us in Courting Change, AI, and the Future of Courts. Let's listen in. Judge Braswell, I'll hand it over to you.
Sure. Thank you. I'm excited to be here. Judge Gates, I'm really excited to have the conversation with you. We're both at the trial court level, and we're seeing, I think, already some changes, and I'm excited to dig in. What are those changes looking like, and what might they look like in the future? So let's dive in and start there. What are you seeing, whether it's in your courtroom or around your courtroom, and what are you hearing about around the country in terms of how AI might be changing the trial court experience?
So, of course, like many individuals, we are seeing lawyers using artificial intelligence to draft briefs, prepare for oral argument. We're also seeing lawyers request AI note takers participate in our hearings to summarize hearings, to prepare questions, to compare testimony against depositions or exhibits. We're also seeing the use of AI by litigants in preparing pleadings. And as judicial officers, we are starting to prepare how to use artificial intelligence responsibly in a way that doesn't affect or erode judicial decision making. How about for you?
Similar. And I think right now it's really on the litigant and lawyer side. I think judges are just now starting to explore this. So I'm on the federal side, and I know some federal court judges who are starting to use this. I know of one who's actually got an AI use policy for her chambers. I'm in the process of developing an AI use policy. One of the things I tell people is, whether you're talking about it or not, the people around you are using it. So your clerks, right, who maybe are in law school already using it and a few years out of law school now are going to start being used to using it. They're going to use it whether you're telling them to or not. And so you might as well be open about it, have a conversation about it, which I do anytime I onboard someone new, whether it's a clerk or an intern. I expressly talk about AI and what I view as responsible use and non-responsible use and what the parameters and limitations are, and that when they are using it, I want to know about it. But I think it it warrants now a step further, which is putting it down in writing and coming up with a use policy so that everyone is clear and there isn't any ambiguity. I think judges around the country are also starting to think about AI as what I call a little bit of a thought partner, right? If I'm preparing for a hearing and I've done this, if I'm preparing for a hearing with, for example, an expert in an area I know very little about and want to just generally have a sense for what are the types of questions I should be asking this expert when I'm, for example, trying to understand their technological functions, right? Their forensic analysis. They've submitted an affidavit to the court. They're telling me what they did to go through this forensic process to extract certain information from a device. I don't know that lingo. How can I understand it a little bit better? So talking to an AI in advance to understand some of that technical language can be helpful. And I think judges are starting to see the merit in that as well. So agree with you. It's sort of growing. Everyone's exploring it, but we're all trying to be really thoughtful about how to do it responsibly.
And I know our Supreme Court is also using artificial intelligence to summarize their decisions and make them understandable. And they are also using what they refer to as AI journalists to provide summaries on significant decisions. We're also wrestling with an AI use policy, making sure that it's used appropriately. We identify what is AI restricted information, what cannot go into a prompt, and then building our own sequestered program to ensure that if we are uploading, for example, an exhibit, using an illustration, hundreds of pages of drug testing, I can't do a word search on positive because every positive for alcohol or marijuana will appear when I'm really focused on a positive for methamphetamine or fentanyl. And I can't just search for methamphetamine or fentanyl because that's tested in every single record. But I can upload it into a sequestered system, request that AI identify for me by dates the individual times when a litigant tested positive for fentanyl and methamphetamine. And it will give me every date in a hyperlink back to the exhibit so that I can actually go in and verify the accuracy of the report that it is generating. So we do have to do it very responsibly, but I do think there is significant use also in trying to make what we do easier to digest for individuals who are consumers of what we do.
I agree. And when I'm using AI, I think about, when I talk to AI about, when I talk to other people about use of AI, I try to think about it in three buckets to just kind of check myself constantly, because I 100% agree with you. We have to start thinking about how to leverage it so that we can better serve the public that we serve. And at the same time, like you keep saying, we have to do it responsibly. We have to do it in a way that doesn't compromise, important principles of fairness and justice, and other important issues, right? Confidentiality, sensitivity concerns. I mean, all of those things are things we have to keep in mind. So I use kind of a three bucket framework, and I'm curious on your reaction to it. I think about first the inputs. So what are we putting into the system? Is it something that's sensitive? Is it something that's confidential? A lot of what we do is publicly available information that we're accessing, so that is a little bit less of an issue, but still, you've got to think about what are the concerns around putting this information into the system. Because we know it's available, right? I mean, it's a publicly available system theoretically, so we have to be careful about what we put in. The second is the outputs. What's coming out? Do I need to, is this a situation where I know a lot about the issues, and so I can quickly issue spot and identify problems, hallucinations, errors? Or is this an area that I don't know very much about, and I need to do a lot of verification before I can really trust any of the outputs that are coming to me? Are any of the outputs things that I have to think about in terms of attribution, right? Or do I have to attribute something to something or someone? So really considering what the output is. I also think a lot about bias, right? What does my input generate, and is it likely to be laden with bias or other issues that I need to sort of be on the alert for and refine my prompts to try to sort of mitigate some of that. And then the third category that I think about is use. How am I going to use this information? Am I, wholly relying on it, which is very rare. I think verification is still really important. The tools are not there yet where you can just wholesale rely on it. So am I using it in kind of a high reliance way, or is there, more of a, again, thought partner approach to the use where I'm just kind of taking in the information, but filtering it entirely through my own sort of systems and processes. And then, it's essentially something different once I do use it. So to me, those three buckets help me just kind of checkpoint myself, right? Kind of, what am I doing with this? How am I doing it? Is it high risk? Is it low risk, depending on the circumstances? And that helps me sort of pause every time rather than just kind of throw myself into it. What are your thoughts on that? And do you have any mechanisms for kind of checking yourself along the way?
So I think that's a great structure for considering the use of artificial intelligence. We look at it in a similar way. We also look at, like you mentioned, the focus on what is being used. So what is the information that's going into the prompt, and what is the purpose for its use? And if we have, like you indicated, restricted information, confidential information that we have an obligation to protect, it's not publicly available information, then that is something we will not use in a commercially available product or free version of any type of artificial intelligence. Anyone who will be using artificial intelligence within our court, it will need to take training on all of the limitations and risks associated with artificial intelligence. And then that's kind of that bias piece and use piece, and how do we use this? And I think it's critically important, like you mentioned, that we're using it when we have the ability to verify. It's predicting an answer for us, and we need to be able to verify that. And I'll give you a couple of examples. Just as I was, this was a long time ago, but working through some different scenarios, I had drafted a significant memorandum in response to what are the different rules that we may need to change in response to deep fakes and artificial intelligence. And I had a citation, but I didn't have the correct citation, and I needed to make sure that I attributed the sentence. So I put into the prompt the sentence and told it to generate for me various sites that corroborated the sentence I had drafted. And it gave me 5 citations. The first one I knew because I had found that and referenced it. And the other 4, I thought, these are amazing. These sound spot on. I went to find them. The other 4 were hallucinations. Another example was I took a simulated jury list and put it into artificial intelligence and asked it to identify jurors who would be likely to acquit the defendant. It told me it was unethical. It wouldn't do that. So then I asked it to identify the jurors who were likely to be unfair or biased. And he promptly responded and gave me an answer. And then I went back into the scenario. I made no changes other than to attribute a race to the victim and the defendant. And then I asked it to go identify the jurors, and it changed my jurors. So I think it's incredibly important for us even to recognize the output that may be adjusted based on facts that we don't even understand why it's making the predictive response that it's giving us.
Yeah, those are really great experiments to, people often ask, well, what can I do to better prepare myself? What can I do to really kind of understand? And are there courses? Are there and I'd say really the best way to learn is to play with these tools and experiment with them and see where they're really flawed and where they're really good, and where they're somewhere in between. And once you start to, and every tool is different, right? You could do the same thing in ChatGPT that you do in Gemini and get different results. You start to get a feel for the tone of each AI. I mean, but you can't really assess that or see that unless you're actively engaging with these tools. So I think that's great that you're running these kinds of experiments. I will say, just similar to the experience that you had in terms of kind of how you can manipulate the AI and maybe some of the biases that may be embedded in it. I often prepare presentations, and there's some great tools out there that leverage AI to help you, put slides together. So instead of spending 4 hours on something, you can put something pretty quickly together in like 30 minutes. But when I ask for images, and I ask for an image of a judge, I always get, unless I am specifically prompting it for a female judge of a different background, I always get a white male judge in most of the products that I've used. And that's sort of a reflection of that bias that's sort of embedded into the system. So unless I'm thinking about that, all of my presentations are going to have, white male judges in the images. And so if I want to alter that, I really have to be thoughtful about the prompt, go back and redirect it and be specific about what I'm looking for. What use cases do you see out there that are most promising, or use cases that you've thought about, being potential tools in the future that maybe you haven't seen yet, but you think would be just amazing in terms of our profession?
I'm really excited about the use of artificial intelligence for our self-represented litigants to help direct them to how to file, giving them information, legal information on the process to help them prepare for court proceedings. I'm really excited about that. We're exploring the use of artificial intelligence, particularly in family court. Those folks tend to be self-represented litigants. They're navigating through a really difficult time in their life. The process is just complicated. We have to know all of these details about your finances and your debt and your assets, and you're in acute trauma, and where your kids go to school and where they're going to be, and what your thoughts are and what the risks are and what your pension is. And there's so much information to gather. It's kind of overwhelming, I think, for parents. And we ask them to develop parenting plans, but they're not child developmental specialists. And I'm excited for the use for our court consumers who are coming to court in a self-represented capacity, and individuals who are struggling with language and understanding the forms and the instructions. So I'm excited for that use. What are you seeing as some of the promising uses for your court?
So I haven't seen it yet. In fact, I actually tried to do something like this and it didn't quite work. So I feel like the tools aren't quite there yet, but will be soon. I'm excited about some of the administrative help that it can offer. So, right now when I have a set of motions on my docket to deal with, it's kind of first in, first out, right? If I sort of go in order of the time that they were filed, and unless something jumps out at me as really needing to be prioritized, because, I just had a conversation with the litigants in a discovery hearing, and I know I have to prioritize this motion, it's pretty wooden in terms of how I prioritize my docket. And I would love to be able to have enough data extracted from every, filing and piece of information that's in front of me to more intelligently assess what I should be prioritizing of the 300 plus cases, 350 cases that I have, and the, dozens of motion on file for each one. What should I be focused on first to really ensure that there's not any bottlenecking where it doesn't need to be? So again, I've tried kind of playing with some tools and seeing if I can use them to kind of intelligently prioritize. But to me, the administrative assistance could be a huge boost for courts. We are so busy, and I think we're going to get even busier in the face of more pro se litigants, being comfortable filing on their own, filing more as a result of the facility of filing documents. So I think if we don't do something to better sort of triage, that bottleneck is going to grow, and we're not going to be able to keep up. So I'm excited about, I gave just one example on motions, but I'm excited generally about kind of the administrative help.
And we do use some tools in kind of identifying our data anomalies in case management. What case doesn't have a future date set? What case tends to be aging in a way that seems unusual? So we are preparing to use more tools and dashboards to help us in our case management to make sure that we're able to process every case delayed justice is not justice, and so we want to make sure that we are efficiently providing justice to everyone. So that is something that we are certainly focused on as well, using it in an administrative way. I think one thing that we are cognizant about or of is to make sure that we're not using large data sets in an inappropriate way. So having it digest large data without the piece which demonstrates the human judgment that we as judicial officers make. You see it on a record, just a blank record that's going up to the Court of Appeals. We as trial court lawyer or trial court judges know that a transcript will say yes or no. But we know from watching that individual testify, their reaction, their delays, their response, the fact that they may be tearful when they're reacting in a way where they're saying no, and versus the record says no. Artificial intelligence hears no. And so it's that the judgment, the piece that's human, that is, we want to make sure we don't lose that.
I agree with you. And similarly, I think for all courts around the country, there's some technology already available, right, to help us deal with some of the administrative work. But to me, it's exciting to think that at some point that technology can be more customized and more nuanced. And every judge is different in terms of how they prioritize certain issues or, motions or whatever it might be. And so to be able to kind of teach a system, right, in a safe environment, in a closed environment, teach a system what your preferences are, and then have it be able to help you prioritize based on your preferences, to me would be the real boost. But I couldn't agree with you more on, really being thoughtful in terms of I always say where AI should be and where it shouldn't be. We talk a lot about what AI can do and what it can't do. But to me, the bigger question, the more important question is what should it be doing and what should it not be doing? And we're in that window right now where we need to be thinking about that, right? Where should it be and where should it not be? Because it's getting so powerful. And so that question of what can it do might not even be a question eventually. And it really is about what should it do. So on that front, are there areas where you sort of draw the line and you say, I don't care how powerful AI ever, how powerful AI gets, it should never do X. Do you have that sort of bright line for yourself?
Absolutely. I have a lot of them. But obviously, in my opinion, artificial intelligence should never be making a decision in a court. It should never be taking voluminous information, assessing exhibits or transcripts and making a decision. It's that human judgment that's critically important. It can be, like you said, a thought tool in research, but it's not a replacement for our research and our analysis. It's a tool, but it doesn't replace what we do in our analysis and the way that we see information, the way that we see humans, and the way that we make judgments and decisions. So I think that's always going to be a bright line for me. What about you?
Well, let me play devil's advocate because I agree with you. I think that there is an important component to human decision making that AI, at least today, and I think even in the future, can't capture that context, that nuance, that human interaction, that human emotion. But let me play devil's advocate for a minute. There's research that suggests that in some respects, AI is a better decision maker in the sense that it's consistent. It has access to a lot more information than we can ever have access to, right? And it's instantaneous access. It doesn't get tired. It doesn't get angry, right? It doesn't sort of have bad days and good days. And there's research to show that, judges, although they have a particular view of something or an approach they believe they're taking when their decisions are studied, shows that they're actually doing something different than what they think they're doing, right? There's this sort of disconnect between what they want to do and what they are actually doing. And so in that respect, arguably judges are more flawed and less capable of being consistent and sticking to precedent, and maybe not necessarily sticking to precedent all the time, but being sort of constrained in a way that's helpful and good for the evolution of the legal landscape. What's your reaction to that?
I mean, I think that's something that we're always going to have to wrestle with. I think it's incredibly. I agree with you in many of the points that you made about that we sometimes have reactions to circumstances that we're not even aware why we react in a particular way. In our court, we spend time at the beginning of our appointment. We can work with a court psychologist to kind of help us uncover some of those pieces that we see and that we might react, so that we're aware. And it's kind of that piece as a human. I can take steps to try and understand decision making, to understand myself, to understand who I am in my human experience and my interaction, where in a predictive AI model, it gives me an answer. But just like the jury scenario where I had it race, it gave me different jurors, but I have no idea why it chose those jurors. And it can't tell me why it chose those jurors. Why did juror 4 become a biased juror simply because the defendant was identified as Black? But they were fair for a juror who was white, and there was nothing in the information that I fed it into the prompt about potential bias or about what that juror had experienced in their life. And yet it used some analysis, some reasoning that I don't know, to be able to conclusively conclude that an individual would be biased. And so I think as humans who make judgments, we can challenge ourselves and assess for ourselves, why are we making these decisions? What is going into this decision making? Am I having a bad day? If I am, I probably shouldn't be making this decision today. But I think judges who don't do that, that's something that we have to struggle with and ensure that as judicial officers, we are responsible and responsive to those human inadequacies and those human risks. What do you think?
I agree with you, and I think you're identifying really important concepts that go beyond, like, okay, we're humans, and so we can be more nuanced, and we can take into account context. I think one of the things you're highlighting, and I think it's so true, is accountability, right, and trust. So even if the AI explains to you why it does something, are you going to trust that that's really what happened in the sort of process of ingesting this information? And if you're not okay with the decision the AI has made, who do you hold accountable, right? I mean, as a judge, I'm held accountable through objection to my recommendation, if it's a recommendation to a presiding judge as a magistrate judge. And if it's a case where I'm the presiding judge, I'm held accountable through the appeals process, right? It goes to the 10th Circuit. So there's an accountability system. There's also this give and take, I think, in the human interaction that's really critical, and that I think is an important part of how our society is organized and the sort of social contracts that we've formed with each other, that goes away if you are suddenly delegating decision making to AIs. So overall, I tend to agree. I mean, yes, maybe it's true that we are not perfect. Yes, maybe it's true that an AI has greater access to information and can be more consistent, but there's a really important human dynamic that relates to trust, accountability, and sort of the social contract that we're all part of that is really crucial. And I agree with you, that line is an important line. Well, we are close to the end, and I want to make sure I also just kind of ask you kind of the big question, like, what do you want people to know about AI as a judicial officer who's thinking about it, who's kind of grappling with it? What do you think is a great takeaway for anybody listening to this podcast, whether they're a judge or a lawyer or something else?
So I think the takeaway for a judicial officer is it's here. It's a change to our society and a change to the way that courts operate. And we need to be proactive, and we need to understand how to use it and how to use it responsibly. I think back to when I was really young, and one task that I was given when I was in elementary school was to determine what day of the week I was born on. And every kid approached that project in a different way. And I remember, like, my parents collected these calendars that came with checkbooks. And so I went back a million years and looked at all of those little calendars to figure out what day of the week I was born on. And I was having a conversation with my daughter the other day, and she's like, "What day of the week was I born on?" And I was like, "Look it up." And like within 2 seconds, she had the answer to what day of the week was she born on. It probably suggests that maybe her mother should have been more attentive to what day of the week she was born on. But the thought of going back to thinking, well, we would just ignore the internet. We would just ignore that as a tool to be used by litigants, to be used by the court. So I guess the takeaway message for judicial officers is you need to be thinking about it because it's here. And for litigants, I think it's important for them to understand that we as courts are not substituting our responsibility and our judgment in this critical branch of government to some model that we don't thoroughly understand, that we will use it responsibly. We will use it in a way that is a tool, but we will continue to serve and adhere to our oath in a way that is responsible and thoughtful. What are your takeaways?
So well said. I feel like that's exactly where we should end. I think that's a perfect takeaway. I'll actually end with a little anecdote of my own that mirrors yours. I was in my rental car the other day. My car's in the shop, and I have a rental car that I'm not familiar with, totally different, like model, make, everything. And I was at the gas station and trying to figure out where that little lever is to open up the, right? And so it was like, okay, I can sit here and search my car. I can open up the owner's manual and try to figure out where it is, or I can ask ChatGPT. And sure enough, I said, this is the model and make, this is the year, where's the gas lever? And it just, here it is. And that's where it was, under the seat, in a place I probably wouldn't have found if I was looking for it. But it told me exactly where it was.
Well, thank you both for your time. I think we've learned a lot about AI as a thought partner and about the types of information we want to go into AI. So thank you both for your time, and thank you for allowing us to court change just a little bit more.
I'd like to thank Judge Braswell, Judge Gates, and Rabia for taking the time to speak with us today. Trials may look a lot different in 10 or even 5 years than they do today. But as the judges note, think less robot judges and more time saved for litigators to do what they do best. The key now, as the tech develops, is to find the best mix that works for an equitable justice system for all. Thank you, as always, for joining us for Clarity on Tech, powered by the Thomson Reuters Institute. You can follow or subscribe to this podcast on your favorite podcast platform, and don't forget to share with your colleagues and leave a 5-star review. For more data-driven analysis of today's professional services market and in-depth conversations with industry thought leaders, visit us online at thomsonreuters.com/institute and follow us on LinkedIn under the Thomson Reuters Institute. Clarity on Tech is a production of Thomson Reuters, copyright Thomson Reuters 2025.